Hey friends, what is up? Derek here from BOM Sucks with more BOM Bites, where we feast upon the words of Christ one bite at a time. So I want to ask you, why this book and why now? Because you notice the church has been very transparent with its history and bringing out Saints, volumes 1 and 2, and really bringing church history really to the forefront right here. There's so much available on the Gospel Library app with regards to revelations and context and giving all of this history. Well, I think the reason why is in section 69 of the Doctrine and Covenants. If you look at the section heading, it's to John Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery. This was written in November of 1831, and they're getting ready to have a conference, and they're putting all of these together, all of these revelations so far. In fact, they've done section 1, they've done section 133, and they're putting these all together. And so John Whitmer was to take money that had been contributed for the building up of the church, and this instructs him to accompany Oliver Cowdery, and also directs him to John Whitmer to collect historical material in his calling as church historian and recorder. He was called to do that back in section 47 of the Doctrine and Covenants, and he's done that up to this point. But when you're a historian and when you're a recorder, sometimes you don't know what to write. I know if you guys have been keeping a journal at all, you're just like, what do I write that is important and interesting to others? Well, you get to verse number 3. Also, that he shall continue in writing and making a history of all the important things, which he shall observe and know concerning my church. One thing that's interesting, I don't know if you've ever kept a journal for an extended period of time, sometimes the unimportant things at the time become very important later on, or they become very interesting. You're just writing stuff down that you don't think's that great, but later on people will. I promise you that. And speaking of the people who will be reading these, go down to verse number 8. Verse 8, preaching and expounding, writing, copying, selecting and obtaining all things which shall be for the good of the church and for the rising generations that shall grow up on the land of Zion, to possess it from generation to generation forever and ever. Amen. So the principle here is that the Lord expects histories to be kept for the good of the rising generation. So the question I pose here is, how might church histories and personal histories benefit the church today, especially the rising generation? Which is interesting because church history for the longest time was a very difficult thing to be able to find. You wouldn't just you wouldn't just come across it. You would have to go to libraries, you'd have to really study it out, and what you would study would be very historical. It would be, like going back and reading history of the church. It's very much just a list of history. Not always the most interesting things unless you're a big historian. That's why I love the fact that the church has brought out these gospel topics essays and brought out history and brought out saints. And like I said, all of these things, all for the benefit of the rising generation. Now, I know what you're thinking. There's a lot of people out there who look at some of the things in our history, some of these ugly things that we don't always understand, and wondering, how can this benefit the rising generation? Well, you go all the way back to like one of the very first episodes that I did here for the Doctrine and Covenants. I introduced you to a thing called presentism. And presentism is when you're trying to judge people from the past by what we know right now. That is so unfair. So if you can do all that with the understanding of presentism, understanding that we are not to judge the people of the past by what we know. And again, our country has had problems with that. Our church has had problems with that. There's been people leaving the church, sadly, because of that. Let's be kind to these people. So these things that were written back then are for our benefit, to help us understand. And some we learn from sad experience. Others we learn from good experience. I love in the Book of Mormon how Moroni, at the very end of the Book of Mormon, he says, look, condemn me not because of mine imperfections, but please just be grateful for what we have given to you so that you may learn to be more wise than we have been. And so I love history. I love church history. I love studying about it. Even the tough things, I try to take into consideration what these people were going through. I have no idea, no point of reference what it was like to deal with what they had to deal with at that time period. I live in a comfortable house, air conditioning, good, very comfortable surroundings. I don't know what it was like to live back then, so I'm not going to judge them for that. And so I would say this idea of having this history, please use it and learn from people. Don't judge them, and don't use it to further the purposes of people's apostasy. That's not a good thing. Don't do that. You move forward learning from the past. Like it says in this section, for the good of the church and for the rising generation. And this will help for generation to generation if you will use it that way. So anyway, I love that message and I love what is taught here. Please utilize this church history and learn from it and become better people because of it. Hey, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing and thanks for sharing. Godspeed. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.